Welcome to Wake Up Excited, a podcast about living a creative and fulfilling life. I'm Brad Frost, and in this episode, I talk with Gemma O'Brien. Gemma is a Sydney-based artist and designer known for her stunning large-scale murals, her lettering, calligraphy, and a whole lot more. I had the opportunity to bring my art teacher mom to Smashing Conf, which is a phenomenal conference about design and development and a whole lot more. Super inspirational. And it was so much fun to see my mom light up during Gemma's talk, where she was presenting all of her work and talking about the importance of art, the importance of design, and everything that she discussed, all of her work really embody what this podcast is all about. So I knew I needed to talk to her, especially because she was at a really interesting point in her life where she was wrapping up a master's degree in neuroaesthetics, studying the intersection of art and neuroscience. So we talk about her journey into the world of neuroaesthetics and talk about what she's learned about flow states and creative intuition and how we could all foster that in our own creative lives. We also talk about nurturing our creative selves, how optimism is a superpower but takes a heck of a lot of work. We talk about the healing power of the arts and the importance of really stepping outside of your comfort zone in order to grow as a person. So before we dive into the episode, I just want to remind you that Wake Up Excited is a total labor of love and is totally self-funded. So if you want to support the show, support me, support my family, I'd love it if you checked out our online courses where we teach designers and developers how to wield design systems, design tokens, and now AI in conjunction with design systems to make great digital products. You can check them out at bradfrost.com/courses. You could use the code WakeUpExcited to get 15% off. All right, without any further ado, here's my conversation with Gemma O'Brien. Gemma, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So here's the big question. What has you waking up excited?
Well, right now, I would say the thing exciting me most is actually going back to thinking like an artist after thinking like a scientist for a year.
So you had like a switch brain experiment?
I did. I did have a switch brain, although it was self-imposed a switch brain experiment. I've been in London for the last year studying neuroaesthetics. So I left my studio in Sydney. It's been an experiment in itself.
Wow. So that's huge, just moving across the world and doing something radically different. You're like shocking your system in all the ways.
But I didn't really know that at the time. I think I didn't know what I signed up for.
You're just like, sure, this sounds like a great idea. This will be fine. And
Exactly. Like move to another country that has the exact opposite of Australia in terms of weather and energy, leave my massive art studio, become a student again in science. It was insane on all levels.
so we were just together at Smashing Conf in Freiburg in Germany. We were all kind of down in the lobby celebrating after the conference, and you kind of came downstairs and you're like, I am 1 week away from like delivering my thesis. I'm like, what are you doing here? This is
Yes, yes.
that is a bold move there. That is it. But you did it. Did you deliver your thesis?
You know what? I actually have another month because I almost finished. And then I
Good.
was like, you know what? I am a perfectionist. And so I've got until November.
Beautiful.
But I
Beautiful.
have been skipping all the parties in with all my papers and proofreading every single day since then.
Yeah, you are in the home stretch. Actually, and I connected you with my wife, who is literally this weekend. She holed herself up in a hotel room. We got her a hotel room so that she could take these like comprehensive exams. And it was like as soon as the exams started, she had like 48 hours, and she was like, I think that I worked like 40 hours on
Oh
it.
my God. Oh, so was it one of those ones where you're in like a timed situation
Yes.
and oh,
And
that's horrifying.
it was like 16 essay questions, but each question had like 10 bullets to it as well. So it's like, and that's like on top of like the thesis and the project and like all of that stuff. So it's just you, you and her are like on this like sort of similar path. So that's why I was like, oh my God, like you're speaking at a conference and traveling while you're also doing this like really intensive.
Yeah. You know what? It's funny though, because after I think I emailed with her afterwards and she just said, I can't believe you're replying to emails while you have a thesis due. And I'm like, you don't even know the half of it. But full respect to her. And I also support the hotel room method.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes you just need to be like holed up in a room and just get it done.
Obviously, you have an artistic practice and you have, I'm sure, rituals and routines and things that you know that are kind of tried and true methods for getting you in the zone. Were you able to superimpose some of those processes onto to your
Yeah, that's a
scientist
really
brain?
good question, actually, because having like 10 to 15 years working in like art and commercial illustration, it took me that long just to work out what was my workflow. So to go into this new setting, like it didn't translate. But that was also part of the reason why I wanted to do it. I had been in my art studio space for 5 years in Sydney, and that in itself was an experiment where I went full into like, what is my artist identity? Like, basically, like, if you're left to your own thoughts and ideas, like, what happens? And I did that. And I had all these crazy ideas and reflections and painted and experimented and did all of it. And at the end, I had this list of like, what am I going to do when I leave the studio? Because I had to leave after this 5 year mark. It was to paint
Oh,
the whole space. I had like a list of galleries I wanted to like go oversee. I had all this list of like art goals. Studying neuroaesthetics was not on the list. And yet one day I was like, I had all of these ideas written in the art gallery, like in my space where I was working. And I just made this connection between the neuroscience podcasts I was listening to and the like art and design things I was listening to and thought there's this missing link in between that I'm interested in. Like, where do I
yes.
study that? And
Yes.
I discovered one course in London, neuroaesthetics, and one in America called neuroarts. And I'm
Yep.
like, what is this? And I kind of like just applied, just like, "Yeah," and then got in. And I was like, all right, well, this is what I'm doing when I leave my studio. And I moved out of my art studio. And then a month later, I moved to London. And that was when I was strapped into the roller coaster. And I was like, all right, I'm in. And it was like this. But I do think there was an element of like intention in like noticing that I had an artist brain that was very all over the place, like shifting between things, working on multiple projects, like what's called divergent thinking, like in
Yes.
science terms. And I
Yep.
was curious if I actually went into an environment or like a way of thinking that was more linear or more structured, like would that mean I would improve that skill and become a better artist by doing the opposite?
Yeah.
But it was very
Yeah.
challenging, very, very challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's you're it all that sounds like you're putting yourself in a very different and uncomfortable environment in order to better understand yourself, your own brain, and just brains in general
Yes.
on how we process these things, how we work, how we connect with aesthetics and connect with beauty and connect
Yeah.
with like all of that. So what'd you find?
Well, I guess as another little bit of a lead up, there were other, obviously we live in a world now where there's so much that you can track in terms of like data, whether it's like steps
Mm,
or like your heart rate. And so
yeah.
also before I left, I was like doing weird experiments where I would like run to an art gallery and like see if my heart rate changed in certain exhibitions, or like I went to like a brain scan place and did calligraphy and thought like what's happening. So it was kind of like very lo-fi versions of then what I was like reading papers
Yeah.
about that are very formal. And I think the biggest thing I learned was that science is serious business in terms of like what counts. I didn't know the concept of like being statistically significant. I'd seen so many
Sure.
talks where like people have shown brains on their presentation and just had some thoughts, but it was a very different thing to like,
Yep. Yep.
structured psychology or scientific
Yep.
experiments. So that was a
Yeah.
steep learning curve. I was suddenly in like advanced quantitative statistics because I thought I can do that without no basic statistics. I quickly learned that it was like putting myself in like a burning, uncomfortable situation. Like I was sitting in the quantitative statistics lecture hall and just felt like heat coming from my face because I knew how like over my head it was. But then when I actually failed the first advanced quantum statistics exam because I just didn't know what I was in for. But the second resit, I went turbo for 2 weeks and I was like, I'm going to get this. And then when I finally, like, I got a credit, like, on the resit, I felt like, you couldn't use ChatGPT in the exam. It was handwritten. It was just what you understood. And that sense of, like, achievement was, like, so profound that, yeah, I'm like, my brain works. My brain has grown.
I mean, that's seriously, that's so impressive. It reminds me, and I know, like, yeah, you talking about like health and fitness, it almost kind of feels like people experience those like plateaus in their health, but you can also hit these plateaus in other areas of your life, intellectually, creatively, whatever, where you're like, okay, like I can do this and I could keep doing this. It's not that it's things are bad, it's just
Yeah.
that this is a known quantity to me. And it's the fact that you like jumped into this whole other realm and had to like demonstrate that you're able to teach yourself entirely different skill sets. That's
Yes.
incredible. Good for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So, I mean, like that side of it, all those, like the core elements of the course that included like stats and psych and neuroscience, and that was all new. But then the actual research felt closer to home because I was like working with artists and
Yeah.
that I was like, I'm going to lean into my strengths here, which is like a network of like 15 years of like living artists who are doing the thing, which is like
Yeah.
what the papers were missing. Like they were doing experiments with artists in a lab setting where they're like,
Yeah.
draw a picture from this triangle and these two circles and like therefore you're
Yeah.
creative. And I'm like, that is not how it works. So
Yeah.
I could bring in, for what I lacked in this area, I brought some more of the real life art connections into the study. So
That's fantastic. So you were kind of like, here's people that are out there living and breathing in this world. What did you study with
yeah.
them? Like, what did you do?
So my portion of it, because it was, obviously my first foray into research, was just like self-reports, and it was about flow state. Experiencing flow state was studied originally like 50 years ago with artists. They were the first people that reported like this experience of like losing track of time, being fully immersed in the activity, having like laser point attention, all this time passing, and all of these different things started with artists. And so my research was working with another researcher who was hooking people up to brain scanners while they were painting to see like what's actually happening in your brain when you're in flow state. But my portion of it was more just self-report, but doing it like in a longitudinal way. So like each day you're getting data like as someone painting from start to finish. So like one day they might be mixing paints and they don't experience flow state, but then as they get towards the end and like, so it's kind of like seeing it across time in a real setting, which was cool.
That's amazing. Did you find anything that was surprising to you,
Yeah.
like coming out of that?
Well,
Like,
I mean, the thing was, I think because it was my research was like, as I said, I'm new. Like, I could have just kind of like joined on to what Ollie was doing and like written up a report based on his experiment, but I wanted to bring my own like hypothesis. And so my idea was that you're more likely to experience flow if you're trusting your gut in the process. So if you're like following intuition in your creative process, then that's more likely to lead to flow state. So that was like quite novel. And flow state's already fringe in psychology.
Yeah.
Like, and intuition is like more fringe. They're like, should we study this? Like, can we study it? Like, and I'm like, that's what I'm gonna do. So I brought these two things together. And I only had a small sample size, but it was statistically significant that intuition in the process predicted creative flow. And that was like separate from experience. So say, for example, you might be an expert in what you do, and there's like lots of links between expertise and intuition or like is it just a speeding up of what you know and then, but even after controlling for high levels of expertise, it was still like this big predictor of flow. So this is what happens
That,
when you put an artist in the science room.
but not just an artist, like an artist that up until that point spent 5 years literally pursuing the intuition. What happens if you just put me in a studio and like let her rip?
Yes,
Like that's
exactly.
incredible. That
Yeah.
is incredible. Because and it makes perfect sense. I've read a lot about, yeah, it's like, okay, we're gonna have these people kind of be in an fMRI machine and like they're gonna like play like this classical piece and whatever, and like we're gonna see what happens to their brain. And then there's like something fundamentally different that happens when you're improvising versus kind of recalling, right? It's like totally different brain regions, but like if you're extrinsically motivated or you're paying attention to something other than your gut instincts, it makes perfect sense
Yeah.
as someone who has experienced what it's like to follow their gut and have fun and get lost in that process versus, okay, I'm doing creative work, but it's for a client. I'm doing this other thing. There's these like extra forces
Yeah.
at play. So you're getting into like real just what's coming from you.
Yeah, totally. And like what you said
Ooh.
about extrinsic like versus intrinsic, like being intrinsically motivated, it's something you want to do, like
Yeah.
is also like one of the new areas where there's a lot of research happening. I mean, the thing is now it's like as I start to understand it, where I'm like, I am super interested in it. And when I said at the beginning, like the thing I'm most excited about is going back to thinking like an artist, like I mean that because I miss it. Like I can feel the difference,
Sure.
but I can't unknow now like all of this new stuff. So I think it's about like bringing it together and maybe just being outside of the university environment just for a
Sure.
little bit to like see how
Yeah.
it forms.
You've suppressed your being for a period
Yes.
of time, and now you got to
Yes.
get back into it. You got to let her rip. Like the
Exactly.
hose has been kind of kinked up.
Oh my God. Yes. What's your favorite food, Brad?
My favorite food, ice cream, hands
Okay.
down.
Which flavor?
All
All
sorts
the
of them.
flavors. Okay. Well, it's like if you were like, you know what? I love ice cream. It brings me so much joy. But for a year, I'm not going to eat ice cream. And that feeling that you know that you get to eat the ice cream again is like me right now. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You've been living like an artistic monk or
Yes,
something like
yes,
that.
yes.
That's so like what are you most excited about when you like get back in front of whatever artistic medium you're gonna like, do you have, you're like, I'm going to this brush or this pen or
Yeah.
this modality? Like what are
Yeah.
you?
Well, you know what? The thing is, so I have a meeting with a new gallery actually that I'm gonna work towards a show next year. So I'm meeting with them
Beautiful.
tomorrow, and I've had like a bit of a break from my like doing an exhibition for a while, specifically because I wanted to have new inputs, like and new
Yeah.
inspiration. And so I think there's two parts of it. Like one is actually just like letting go of thinking and analyzing that mindset and painting and exploring through the physical form again
Hmm.
without like kind of abandoning the way I used to do things, going back into that like physical experimentation. But then the other
Hmm.
side of it is like, what is going to be the subject matter? Because often I work with text and words and typography. And another reason I wanted to do this research was because I was like, a lot of artists, one, like dismiss words being in art because the idea is that, well, it should speak for itself or like it's beyond words, it's like it's like all of these things, which I totally understand. However, I am also like, but if you did want to paint words, and the approach would be like painting words from the inside out, what does that look like? Like, so I'm still that part of it is, going to be running, I think, for the rest of my life, like the curiosity, because there's parts of the brain where it's like, there's this is the Broca's region, this is where like words are formed, but like Like, that's crazy to me. like,
Yeah.
like, there was a time where
Yes.
we didn't identify that part of the brain and have someone name, like, I don't know. I think there's just like
Yeah,
a
yeah.
lot of, there's a lot of like research side of it that I think I will do independently, and then there'll be the physical exploration. So who knows what the next little bit looks like,
Uh,
but I'm very
I love it.
excited.
I am very excited for you, and I'm excited to like see like what comes of it. But like, I think that what you're just touching on is I think something that's really really interesting, and with Melissa's work as an arts therapist as well. I think that that was really kind of big thing for me was better understanding the immersion and the experiential parts of this and just the real multifaceted nature of art in general. That's I think one of those things that despite being around art and my mom's an art teacher and stuff is like despite being in that world for so long, I didn't until very recently understand that the artifact is part of it, but
Yeah.
only part of it. That it's there is all of these different parts of your brain that are sort of being activated, but then there's also just this notion of like time and the artist's experience, and that's why we care about Frida Kahlo's like
Yeah.
bus accident that like left her, you
Yes.
know, like in a state and stuff like that. And so that so there's like all of that stuff that gets woven into work that I think that I didn't really appreciate at that level until very, very recently.
And I think that experience though is quite common because, if you think about like people either like feeling like they can't walk into an art gallery because either they don't, it feels like it's a level of expertise, or, but at the same time, you have a gut response to like everything, like you like
Yeah,
certain colors, you have preferences, like, and like all the reasons for why you like certain things are both like complex and individual, but also, a lot of the studies in aesthetics is like trying to find like, are there similarities? Like what? It's super interesting. I think that another part of what made me interested in this was that as I was like looking, trying to like up my skills in art history, it felt like that was like a missing link that could perhaps be, I don't know, not necessarily a universal way that people experience things, but that the reasons that you like things could be like just because it reminds you of something, or just because it's really familiar to you, or
yeah,
like
yeah,
why do people go to the Louvre and see like these paintings that even if they're not into art history or they don't know anything about the artist's life, like is it like the fact that it's just really well known, or it's like a status symbol, or
yeah.
like there's so many different reasons. And it's just super interesting.
I find myself, even as somebody who I know a lot about music, but to like go to a concert and be brought to tears at a concert, doesn't matter like what chords they're playing or like what key it's in or ooh, I really like that syncopation they're doing there or whatever. When you're able to be present with any beautiful thing, it overtakes you, right? There is something very, very primal that's very interesting because it's not an intellectual thing. It's oh, I don't know
Yes.
anything about art. I don't
Yes.
I can't do that. I can't draw worth a crap or whatever. It's like no no no. Like you get put in front of a powerful piece of artwork or a moving aesthetic experience and you will be moved because you're a human being
Yes.
and you have a brain in your head.
Well, it's funny because I draw and I also do calligraphy, it's either I can't draw, I've never been able to draw, or I have terrible handwriting. And it's always that's always the thing. And I mean, I truly think, like, of course, there's so many different factors, but I think it's the same as any like skill, or like if you have someone who's like supportive of you or like gives you positive feedback when you're younger, or if you show a drawing in class and everyone loves it, and then
Yep.
you practice that skill, or you have someone that like shows you new techniques that allows you to like develop. I do truly think that anybody can do it. It's whether you actually want to, and whether you get something out of it. I guess it's probably the same as like maybe playing an instrument, or
Oh. Yeah.
No?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Any creative endeavor. And like one of the biggest things like I say about music is that it's like we are hardwired for it. Like you
Mm,
see any toddler that could stand on 2 feet and you put on music, they know what to do, right? It's this stuff is hardwired in us. And I'd also say that we're hardwired to draw and create and
yeah.
whatever. And a lot of it's the those extrinsic and environmental factors that end up talking people out of it. And sort of back to Melissa and her work as an arts therapist, because she has to encounter these people who are, in various stages of pain or recovering from trauma or in the process of dying and like all of like these really like hard things. And they still are holding on to that, like, I can't draw. And the exercise for Melissa and other arts therapists and stuff is to sort of like help them get over that hurdle. It's back to your research, like just going from your gut rather than focusing on like the technical
Yeah.
outcome.
Tell me more about how she works with these people. Like, is it just like tools are provided, or are you like looking at like objects to draw, or is it purely from imagination, or?
It's so vast, the things that you can do. And like I think that this is like one of the other really interesting things that I want to get your take on, because you have wove between so many different mediums and stuff, is like certain things are good at doing certain things.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
If you're
yes.
trying to process your own self-identity, there's like these like masks are like,
Yes.
it's like,
Oh,
oh, okay,
yes, I've
here's
heard
like
of
like
that
a
one.
mask that we've
Yeah.
done. But then it's like, if you just like need to get some shit out, like here's a big old piece of clay, beat the hell out of this thing and like
Yes,
really like
yes.
let her rip. Like each one of these artistic mediums has their own kind of material affordances, I guess, that are conducive for certain kinds of healing. I'm geeking out as kind of like a person just in the passenger seat a lot of this. But
Geeking
I'm
out like as
curious,
a
like,
proud husband, but also like as a fan of like how
yeah,
it works, and
yeah.
it's cool, you know.
I've truly, with all of heart, believe that everyone has creative capacity. Everyone can and should participate in the arts. That doesn't mean you need to, be able to be a virtuoso and play your own concerts. But it does mean that if you feel like picking up an instrument or sketching a sketch,
Yeah.
freaking do it. Freaking
Yes.
do it. Like,
Yes.
you don't need to be you. Like, you don't need to be Joe and like do a big old mural, but like give yourself the permission to just like get at it if you
Yeah.
if you at all like feel like that.
Well, I liked what you said about also when you were talking about what Melissa did with the different, like, it could be clay or it could be drawing, because everyone like has those different sensibilities, and it could be in the physical, like just the movement.
Yes.
Or it could be, there were some studies that I was reading about that was talking about whether you are more likely to experience flow from drawing, like creating art, or from looking at art. And it found that it's more likely to occur from drawing. But it was actually
Yeah.
suggesting that it's because you're distracted. So that if you're having, like, if you've experienced trauma, if you're having negative thoughts, sometimes the process of like drawing a lemon, like, that actually takes up so much cognitive resources that it might distract you from the horrible thoughts that you're having. So there's like so many different ways, like going back to the non-verbal or not using like language or writing, it is, all of the arts are just different forms of expression that might resonate with some people or might, yeah, I think it's super cool.
This is, I think, something that's really fascinating about neuroaesthetics, the arts in general, and even back to what you were talking about with uh, lettering or not, and oh, like, is that verboten or you're breaking some rule or sort of something like that. But it's like our language centers of our brain, right? And our ability to articulate thoughts, especially that of our inner selves, how we're feeling,
Yeah.
we're very, very bad at that. Most people are very, very, very bad
Yes.
at
It's
that.
like, am I it's like hangry. It's like, am I hungry or am I like, even though that's like, it's true. Like you sometimes don't know to identify and like to, or even if you do know, like to be able to then express that. Like there's so many different things. Like we're weird human creatures on this earth. Like, don't think about it too much.
Yeah. When you experience the arts, when you like can feel people's anguish, or you could feel their frustration, or you could feel their joy, it's very, very difficult to just express that verbal. Like you literally can't express it any other way. There's something there that is just like, it is whenever people say like music is a language or art is a language, it's like, it's freaking true. It's like, it's taken my whole life to go, oh, like that's actually, like now I understand what they mean by that. Like it's not just like some wanky phrase.
Well,
it's actually pretty profound.
Before, like the idea of like getting the chills or like having an emotional response. I think it's always interesting when it takes you by surprise when that happens. Like I don't know if you've ever, whether it's been music or for ages, I would hear stories like, or art historians talking about like, oh, have you ever cried in front of a painting? And I kind of like, kind of rolled my eyes at this idea and thinking like, no. And then until one day I was in a gallery and it happened and it took me by surprise. You don't, it's not in your control. It kind of just happens. And I think,
that's the beautiful thing about it, is that it's like, that is your body, your biological
sending you
body.
A message.
You didn't think, I'm going to do this now. I feel like crying and I'm going to activate that cry switch.
Yeah.
It's like, and that's why, like, especially like whenever COVID started breaking and I went to my first concerts kind of whenever it was starting to be safe to do that.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God. And I was like, quick to just be like, hey, remember concerts? You should go to one of those. Because it's like, it's very difficult to have those kinds of experiences. Like, just like privately or like, like we can watch movies do a pretty good job. There's something to be said about the immersive presence that kind of comes with being face to face with something. Whether that's a performance or a canvas or something else.
Yeah, and with other people as well. I think you mentioned before, like the shared feeling, and it could be in music or even it could be in sports. I guess it's a shared positive feeling, but it could be any spectrum of emotions.
There's a term for it that I learned, and it was as a psychologist, collective effervescence.
That's cool.
People in church pews singing in unison. People at a concert all kind of experiencing something. People being around a theater performance or laughing at an improv show or whatever. There is this elevation that occurs that can really only happen when you are in the presence of others. That takes it beyond just like your personal experience.
It's
like
true.
Whenever I like learned that, I was like, yeah, I know what they're talking about.
Effervescence. That's
pretty good.
The goal. I mean, if you can, I actually was thinking, because when I arrived in London, like, so many, being in Australia, it's a smaller town, like everyone talks to each other, like I'm naturally like, I will talk to someone making my coffee. Like I have loved just having that little chit chat. And when I got to London, I realized it was a different vibe and it's that collective energy. However, you realize that you can shift it, like in small interactions. Like it only takes, I thought they should just hire people like where their job is to just walk around and be friendly to people.
That's your job. Yeah, that's your new job.
So if anyone's hiring.
I love that. Like let's dig into that, because I think that is very much the spirit of the show. And just watching you talk on stage and stuff, I'm like, There we go. Like, I'm very curious to get your take on this because I
Yeah.
think that there's like a natural predisposition, right? Sort of things like genetics play a role. A lot of the Australians I know are quite jolly and exuberant relative to a lot of other folks. But also, yeah, like London town is business town. New York City
Yes.
is like, don't you even freaking think about
Yeah.
making small talk with me and stuff. So it's like you have like an awareness that your kind of nature, which is like, I'm going to smile, I'm going to be friendly, and I can kind of not necessarily like manipulate in like a weird way, but you want to help shape the vibe.
Yes,
right?
It's funny that you said like not to try and manipulate because I think that's like such a key thing because I think what I didn't even realize the difference until I was placed in, for a year in London. And also then like I think the experience of being stressed yourself, like I noticed how much that shifted the energy that it would take. But what I realized is that even if I tried, like even if I was like, oh, that's right, I this is the thing I used to do like when I first arrived. And then as soon as you bring it comes back at you, and it can literally just be like, how's your day been? And
you mean it.
Yes, I genuinely want to know,
Yeah.
It's interesting though, but it's very hard to not feel like like I used to be very optimistic, but without realizing that it was a superpower. Like I think I was quite naive, and I think as I've gotten older and I've like had more difficult situations and experienced more life, I've realized that like if you're optimistic, it can sometimes actually take a lot of energy to be optimistic, but that it's 100% always worth it. Yeah, it shouldn't be underrated is what I think.
You're speaking my language, and that was like I think really like the impetus of kind of putting the show together is exploring all of that, because it's like to carry the attitude that you carry, all you need to do is just, flick on the news, and do we have any right to be thinking about or asking how your day's been or giving a smile or carrying yourself in that way or painting beautiful words that say things like joy? How dare you? Can you speak about that?
Okay, are you saying like, do you think that people question like being happy or positive, optimistic in the state of the world? Is that what you mean? Like,
Yep.
yeah, how
Yep.
very dare, yeah. Look, I would say that like I've felt that more than ever, like in the last, I'd say probably a shift that people have noticed like since the last 10 years where maybe things aren't necessarily worse, but we can see everything all the time. So you can feel things, you can't like deny like the struggles, the complexities, like it's all there. And I definitely went through a period probably around like 2020 where I was like, I'm not allowed to have joy in my life because that's unfair. And I didn't know how to process all of those feelings, and I didn't. But then I was also like, where can I help? What can I do? There's limits to your ability. You can't be everywhere all at once helping everything. And it took a really long time for me to realize like all I can do is in my immediate environment and interactions, like bring the best energy that I can, like do the best job that I can, encourage the people, like lift people up. And I would say only now, and also, look, I have to disconnect sometimes from like what, looking at things because I know that it doesn't help. And I know that I can be my best self. Like I know the things that set me off, and I know that, if I go into nature or if I draw it and I bring these things back, then I'm going to be a better version of myself in the world, which is going to have a flow-on effect. But it's hard. I think it's highly complex.
Yes,
Yeah.
it really is, and it's like that's been the thing that I've struggled with so much. How can you be a caring, empathetic human being who really cares and is connected to people who are, suffering, and people who are going through like way worse than I can ever know,
Yeah.
and to have that stuff sort of show up flashing in front of your face, often without your permission or a heads up ahead of
Oh,
time.
yes.
and,
Yes.
and yeah, and then kind of go back and like, oh yeah, like let's do happy, joyful, like lighthearted things. And it's like, so there really is this tension to, it's like, because it's like it just goes without saying, it's like, of course you care about other
Yeah,
people, you care about this
totally,
stuff, but
totally.
at the same time, like there really is this like well-intended thing that I've heard in said in various ways, which is basically like, if you're not speaking out about this, then you're part of the problem. I understand the sentiment, and it's, I think, coming from often a very good place, but it's also like, it isn't feasible. It's not realistic. No, it's actually counterproductive. And I think that the thing that you came to the realization of feels right, which is you have no choice but to like kind of emanate what you can
Yeah.
into the world. There's some type of like interpretation, I think, that has to happen to basically sort of receive outside input, especially hard outside input, and go, what can I do about this, if anything?
Yeah.
What can I do about this from where I'm at in this moment in time? It's so hard because the feelings don't go away.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
especially whenever you have to, for very, very good reasons, like you said, it's like step away from really hard things, because you're like, that that's going to do nothing but like kind of ruin you.
Yeah.
Like, and
Yeah,
prevent
yeah,
you
yeah.
from showing up. So,
Oh, I think that your example is really good because it's like you realize like what are your strengths. Like everyone has like different superpowers and like things that they or have years of experience in, or and can apply that. And I think then the other thing is that I remember like you'd often hear about like having gratitude, like for if you can't do something, you have gratitude for what you have and then you enjoy it. That can be really hard. Like so many of these things are like easier said as ideas,
yeah.
but like put into practice. But if you do notice that you've got this thing, or if you do a presentation and someone comes up to you at the end and says like, hey, like that story or that thing that you showed me like really helps, like all of these little things can be enough to be like, all right, this is like,
Yeah.
you know, this is a positive force, but
Yes.
it's a daily thing, and it's like everything on a case by case basis, and
Yeah. So it's like you
yeah,
really do need to go into your
yeah,
gut and sort of pull that stuff out. And you're
yeah,
doing I think, the world a service by acting on your intuition, and like, and then communicating that through your work.
oh,
And
thank
like,
you.
I mean, like, do you feel that? Like, do you feel like that's
You know what? I think that's why I continue to do like talks and workshops and things where I'm engaged with people face to face, because a lot of the time spent is alone in the studio or working, in like with people digitally. And like I'm such a in the same way that you talk about the feeling that you get when you're at a concert, like I get so much more from like face to face human interaction. Or even like, I think one thing was with the calligraphy that I realized was after this block of time where I was like, oh my God, like, what am I doing? Like, what is my life? Like, should I be doing these commercial jobs? Like, artists, like, the world is horrible. Like, what matter? All of this spiraling.
yeah,
And then I went and did a calligraphy thing, and I noticed people's response, or if I wrote someone's name and I thought, oh, this comes so naturally to me because I did it for 10 years and I taught workshops in it. This is very little effort with very big impact. And I'm like, okay, I just have to like keep on leaning towards those things that I've built over time that can be a positive force, and just keep on doing that. And I think that, but I have to sometimes remind myself that, like, because, you know, you probably know this, like, sometimes doing workshops and these, like, talks, it can be a big energy output and you
Sure.
can be exhausted afterwards.
Oh yeah.
But it's almost always worth it, like, when
Yeah.
you then, reflect and, yeah, just I think the more that people can have positive face-to-face human interactions, like, it's a good thing. Yes.
Wouldn't you know it? Wouldn't you know it? But I think you're onto something there, and it almost sounds like maybe this year being the exception, but like you kind of have this like rhythm where you're sort of like head down, producing
Yeah.
you're sort of in your own mind, in your own body, in your own space, and then you kind of like come up for air
Yes.
and like kind of
Come
go
back
out
to the
into the
world.
world,
Yes.
check in, and then sort of oscillate back in.
Yeah, definitely. And I need both because, like, if I don't have that isolated, like, deep time to, like, squirrel down all these paths of, like, my interests or these new ideas, then I can't do the other thing, which, you know, I need both.
Yeah.
And you know, it's funny though, because when I think back to when I, like, began in London and I started the neuroaesthetics, and I had so much energy. I was like, oh, I'm going to instantly start, like, a neuroscience, like, TV show. Like, I was so I did not know the depth, but I'm so glad that it was in many ways beyond me, because it was very humbling. Like, I'm like, this is what it would feel like if someone started to draw, or tried to draw,
Yes.
who was a statistics, like a mathematics genius. It would be extremely uncomfortable. It's very, like, especially when you have recognition in one field, it's like,
Yep.
I had to get over myself. Even going back to do observational drawing, like, during COVID, even as an illustrator and artist, I went to a life drawing class and I didn't want to draw in front of everybody because I sucked so much, and I just had to, like, get through that. And all of those feelings are, like, very good things to experience, and
Yeah.
even though they might seem small compared to the things that are happening in the world, they're like, it's good to feel it all, and it helps.
But-
I think you
yeah.
understand other people more.
No, that's great, and I think that's like really something for literally anyone. It's like it is that willingness to kind of endure that discomfort and that beginner's mind and learning the ropes and all of that stuff, especially when you know mastery or you have experience in something else. It's like, I know how to tie my shoes, so it's like, you know, that's fine. But like this brand new thing, a lot of times, like that's oil and water for people, where they get like repelled by it because they don't want to go near that discomfort. But it sounds like you're like, if like you force yourself within reason, let's say,
Yeah.
to sort of like power through and get to the other side, then there's some good stuff to be had there.
Yeah, and I think that there was, like, this part when I was in my studio, like, doing that, like, 5-year almost like artist in residence in my own studio space. Another thing I did realize, there was a lot of weaknesses that you get from working in isolation, where you don't get to collaborate, or, like, new technologies that had come along. Like, you know, I was playing with things, but I could sense that, you know, the things that you might get in a work environment or when you're interacting with people, not when you're an artist cooped up in your I could feel like if I don't take the leap and just, like, put myself in an environment where I might be learning science, but I also might need to learn this new technology that everyone's using to communicate with, that if I just stay isolated, I'm going to lose sense of, like, being connected. And so it wasn't just learning the content, it was so many other things that I think is going to continue to happen. Like, things change so quickly that I'm like, all right, buckle up, baby.
Yeah. I think that's really fascinating, because it really does a lot of times take other people, and a little bit of social pressure is healthy, right?
Yeah,
it's like,
absolutely.
there's like sort of solo work, and it sounds like, you know, you're sort of explaining that dynamic, I think, very well. And I love that was like the focus, and where it really is this, like, here's me, here's my gut, here's my mind, here's like my artistic output.
Yes.
And like, if I am like sequestering myself away, of course we'll carry our influences with us wherever we go and stuff. But like, what happens whenever it's like, it's me in my space and a blank canvas or whatever, like what happens, freaking amazing. Like just to say, you want to talk about gratitude, holy crap, that's pretty freaking amazing. So I'm like so happy that you have like had that experience for so long. These are like some serious like life goals, I think, for a whole lot of people. Is like, yeah, I would love to just like be in my space,
I mean,
listen to myself and my intuition.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
Like,
it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's then when you come to interact with the world, like I think the myth of the artist and the creative like has always been about like well for a long time was about like this individual like insight and like this I've got to leave and go do this thing. I think even in Rick Rubin's book, The Creative Act, he talks about like if you're with someone at the dinner table, like, and they need to leave. And I fully respect that, like, because I know the feeling as a creative, like, I'm on deadline, or your wife cooping up in the hotel. Like, this is, I need to get it done. But at the end of the day, like, we're all here together, and to collaborate on things can often lead to beautiful, more beautiful outcomes than working alone. And in order to do that, you kind of have to come to the table, and like there is compromise, or there is like the complexities of dealing with other humans or other tools. Like that's reality. And I think for a long time I had a bit of an ego and I didn't like to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, now I see over time, like, how much more you can get from being able to go and collaborate and be in different environments, or like even creatively finding ways to meet in the middle. Like sometimes that can lead to better outcomes than if you're just left by yourself.
It's like you need other people to help pull you or rip you out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
I'm also interested in like the kind of like getting over like the ego part, because I do think that that's like something like a lot of people, when you spend so much time getting good at something, right? It can be, it's not even necessarily like an ego thing, like look at me, I'm hot shit, like everybody else sucks, but it's like I know what I can do.
Yes.
And what I have like a belief in my abilities, and that you used the word compromise earlier, and to compromise that vision can feel a little like threatening or uncomfortable or something. But like, did you how did you, like, what's been like your journey into the world of like creative collaboration and getting more comfortable with that discomfort?
Yeah. I guess there was like, it was always present because I've always worked like as a commercial artist and then more as an artist. Mm-hmm. It was always present. But I think I only became more aware of it like as I gained more success. And I think when I got more successful and there were more inquiries, like, because I didn't know how to deal with growth. Like I wasn't a big studio. I think in the stress of that was when I started to realize I either like shut down or don't reply or don't communicate, because that's the way this is how I'm going to get it done. Yeah. But that in order to be able to like operate at that level, I needed to be able to have an assistant who I could like brief and like and work with, and like trying to find the right person to do that, or even like working on a client job where there might be an art director with a vision, and back in the day if I got feedback I would take it like very personally, or I would like be like, they're wrong. And I think like now I definitely realize, well, one, people can help steer the work in different directions. I learn new skills. My repertoire of work would go like in completely new ways that I would never have imagined if I had just been left to myself, or even with tools. Like I was resistant to use the iPad, and then when I finally did, I was able to use color, and I was only using black and white before. Like there's so many different ways. But I think the hardest one is actually when you do collaborate, communicating, both creatively, like how to communicate, like what needs to happen, and then also like with kindness and grace under pressure. And like, that like whole dynamic. But if you get it right, it's amazing. But
Yeah.
sometimes it takes time to figure that out.
Yeah, those are, it's like they're muscles to build.
Yes.
And like
Yeah.
I've learned in my own, yeah, evolution of delegating and getting more comfortable with that it's like usually whatever whatever the person I'm saying to do something, go take care of this, and
Yeah.
it comes back a little like lackluster, it's always my fault. So I'm like, all right, I gotta work harder, and because a lot of it is like, yeah, it's like this stuff. It's that beginner's mind. It's that like what you're just experiencing in this other realm. Like a lot of times, like when you're like bringing in somebody cold into this like world that you've been practicing for literal decades,
Yeah.
it's like, well, of course they're not going to like be able to
Yeah.
like read my mind, but like so yeah, it's a freaking skill. It's a skill set. It's like we got these Jira tickets to work through, and it's like it's
Yeah,
so
right,
incredibly
right.
depressing. But it's like as time goes on, I'm increasingly convinced that it really is the stuff you talk about in the small talk, or like these other like dimensions of people's lives, that it's like that's their sauce, right? Like that's what they're
Yeah.
bringing to the collaboration, right?
That's interesting. I guess like because it's such a different industry. Like when I think often some of the collaborations I'm doing, like with people physically painting, like you have this time, like when you start painting, where you can literally just talk, and so it's like embedded into the process. But that's very different from like we need to get this done by this time, like, and it's like almost like knowing when to shift and like when do you have the time to like
Yeah,
socialize, and also then like having the boundaries of like, because sometimes you might need to just get to work,
yeah.
and sometimes it's like it's knowing when it's the right time for all of the things. Yeah.
I think that there's something interesting there, and I'd be really curious to get your take on it. Could you like take me through like going from like idea to you're doing the work in earnest? So like everything that leads up to you being either, let's say it's like an on-site thing.
I mean, I think using the like real life painting ones are a good example because there are so many non-creative steps in the process that are necessary to pull it off. But like, in a dream scenario, the first stage is always like open creative, like looking at the space, whether it's like physical. I always love to like actually, if I can go there, that's like number one. If I can't go there, like the project I did for it was like Tiffany and Co in Shanghai. It was a really tight turnaround. They hadn't even finished building the space, and they like sent like architectural plans and like maquettes. And so the first bit is like it's inspiration and it's designing, but it's also like designing with all that in mind. And then it's like quickly shifting into like, all right, how do we access this? Like, are we going to have to order? Like, is it going to be scissor lifts? Is it like
Yeah,
stable ground? Is it,
yeah, yeah,
what are the local rules? And then sometimes it's like all like there's a lot of admin type stuff, assembling the team of painters, finding the paint. And to be honest, I love these projects because of the diversity of the things that you have to prepare if there's enough time, so that then when you get there, like the painting part is quite enjoyable, but like the
yes,
lead up
yes,
is, it's like almost putting on a show, like a performance of
yeah.
sorts.
I love that because there tends to be, especially like, for something that's so like visual, whatever Instagram sort of feeds and
Yeah.
stuff, like that's like the very like unglamorous kind of part to it, where there's usually like way more databases and way more spreadsheets than people
Oh
would
yes.
would think for
Yes.
for stuff like that. Uh,
Yes.
that is part of the creative process because you're understanding, right? Like you're like getting oriented with a space. You're getting
Yes.
oriented with the physics, with the location, with the culture around it, with who's
Yeah.
involved. Like all of that stuff is like influencing and informing the actual work. That is like fundamentally different than if like you were to just fly in, someone
Yes.
hands you a brush and just kind of, okay, go do your
Off you
thing.
go. Yeah.
Off-
I mean, people used to say that when I'd sometimes like share videos on Instagram, like, oh, do you just like literally go there and like begin? And it's like, no. But there is Like there is an art to like, calling the scissor lift people. Like I actually love that because it's all relationships as well. It's like, I need a giant ladder tomorrow. Like, but how's your day? Like and like, I do love all of that side of it. But it's a very different thing to when I first started, and it was literally like, I'm in a room, paint it. Like, and it was smaller scale. And I think that if I didn't have those early experiences of the freedom of like smaller walls that didn't require teams, then it would be harder to explain it because, I've had the time to test the paints or to know this color takes 3 coats. Like it's all of those things together. And like, that's why I think I'm so ready to go back into that now after this hiatus, because I'm like, oh, like it's just, it's a full body experience.
Yeah. You gotta like let it rip. I am so excited for you to just like have at it. Cause it's it's like the spreadsheets be damned. Like you gotta just like get in there and
It's so funny, especially like, researching like the area of the research being flow state. Like as much as I found it really intriguing and like could get deep into these studies, there was this certain point where it's like, if you're reading an article about eating ice cream, and then you're like, all right, I just want to eat the fucking ice cream. I'm ready to eat it now. So it's doing the thing is like, the experience of it is sometimes better than analyzing or thinking about it. So
no, that's great. It's speculation, but do you feel like after reading about ice cream for so long, do you think that it's going to be like pretty natural to find yourself in that flow state, or do you feel like you might need like a transition time?
I think it's definitely going to take time. I know it is, and not necessarily because of the research, but just because of knowing that when you stop doing something, it just takes, it takes a little bit. But I think knowing that is reassuring.
Yeah.
There are a few things that I've read that have made me like reflect on my practice from beforehand, that you could like kind of set up the conditions to best thrive, and I think I do have more knowledge now to be able to do that, and it's backed by science. So
there we go. Could you share that? Because like I think in general it's like cultivating flow, great idea. Anyone listening to this, finding ways to do that is like one of like the best things you could do. What are your nuggets of wisdom?
Well, the thing is, like, I think the biggest one that people think about, one of the facets, is attention. So like flow is made up of like this like attention, and I think that that's the thing that feels most under threat for most people, like in our current situation with so many distractions. And I think that I got to a point when I was in my studio where I had all these systems in place, routines to facilitate that, or like I would like not have my phone on, or I know, all of these different things that you can do. Mm-hmm. But then I kind of like adapt to them, and then I need a new level. I've like outsmarted myself, or you just need, I think it's that constantly having to change it. Or even like one of the biggest ones with flow is challenge skill balance. If you reach a new skill level where the thing that you used to find difficult now becomes really easy, and you need challenge or growth to get back to that, because it's not an equal balance of your skills and the task, but it's you experience flow when you go a little bit above and beyond. So like if you're thinking of improvisation, it's like the base thing that you're playing, but then you kind of let go. It's like this holding on and letting go at the same time, or like surprising yourself, like, oh, I didn't actually think that I could do that, and I did. And then if that's sustained, that's like, there was this really interesting article that described flow as like a cascade of learning. And so it's like that you're in this experience where you're like actually going to the next level. And that's why you're so engaged in it. And I'm like, I love that so much, because it's about like growth. And I think that's the difference between, you could be fully immersed in something, scrolling on your phone, and some people would describe that as like a flow because you're fully absorbed. But that's very different from being very engaged like
Yeah.
where you're engaged and you're focused on attention, but you're also it's a growth experience. And
Yeah.
I think that is like super interesting, and I'm curious to see like what is that going to look like in my practice of like painting, and knowing that sometimes it begins with resistance, and it's only if you then
Yeah.
get through that tough bit that you can experience that, and some days you won't. So I'm curious to see it in action.
I love that. I love that. And I think that kind of comes back to what you're saying earlier about that just kind of like the powering through. And I think that might be like the lesson, like for anybody, especially anybody that's like, I want to like cultivate more creativity in my life. I want to like more time with my hands
Yeah.
on some clay or drawing. That first bit is going to be hard, but if you're able to sort of science backed,
Yeah.
it's like this is actually part of it, and to like
Yes.
treat that as growth rather than like I can't do this, I might as well just put this down. Helping people poke through and get to that other side where it's like all of that was just noise. It was just
Yeah.
straight up noise. And that like first contact, yep, you're gonna flub some notes, or you're not gonna get it right because it takes a little time
Yeah.
to sort of get into like the groove of things.
I think that's it's true, and it could also be like on a different day. Like maybe one day you're like, oh, I'm gonna retreat, and then the next day you're like, all right, I'm gonna go again, and it's just the going again.
Yes.
You know, in whatever, it could be anything.
So are there some like quick hit flow state like best practices like a
So what the flow scale that I was using in the study basically has like the 3 pillars, which are like intrinsic reward, so it has to be something that you want to be doing. Effortless control, which is that feeling of like you know what you're doing, but it's like holding on and letting go is that sweet spot. And absorption. But within that, like in the lead up, it is about like choosing an activity, one that you want to do, something that you have a skill set in or are willing to like set that challenge skill balance. But I do think that it's different for everybody, because obviously like what is intrinsically motivating to you and to someone else are going to be completely different. So there's like that element of like self-awareness and reflection and having a goal is like a really is something to work towards, even if in the process you forget that goal. Like they often talk about an artist like working towards an exhibition. Like when you're painting, you're not necessarily thinking about the exhibition, but the fact that you have like a time, like a thing that you're working towards.
Yes. I think that there's a lot that checks out there, especially around like, ain't nothing like a deadline. That is for sure. I think that you're spot on with like the self-awareness and the intrinsic part, and going, I want to be able to do this, is a very interesting one, because I think a lot of people will try to put themselves into those situations for those more extrinsic reasons.
Yeah.
I want to learn how to play the guitar to get the girl or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's
But
like,
you know what? Like I so there's lots of also studies that show that you can still experience flow if you're extrinsically rewarded. Like people experience it at work, even if they don't really want to be doing their job, then they get into
Sure.
it and they're like, oh, if you're learning guitar to get the girl, I think that's a totally natural thing. And sometimes
Sure.
that like, you know,
Sure.
it's like, what does the girl represent? You know, it's like someone that something that you desire, that you want to like, you want to be impressive, or you want to showcase your skill, and that you, even if that is the goal, like that might be enough to like, it's another goal, like beyond the actual, you know, virtuoso playing, like it's a real one.
Yeah, it does all sort of like come back to, I feel like almost like the feedback loop of like the external world, and then sort of pointing it back inwards to go, okay, well, what does that say about me if I'm the kind of person that wants to learn guitar to get.
Yeah. I mean we could do a whole other episode on like the philosophy of like intrinsic versus extrinsic reward. I think all things are valid.
And that's why I like sort of digging into, and that's been why the name of this podcast is called Wake Up Excited, is because like I find that question to be very interesting because it picks at, I think, the pulse of somebody. Like what's exciting is different than like what's new, because it's what's new is, well, we're just, another day of going through the routine, right? But it's like, if it's exciting, it's like that's kind of picking at that, like what is personally fascinating to you in this moment in time. And like I've had many conversations just with those random people walking through life, people at the grocery store and so on, and it's like you could see that I've like really hit them with a ton of bricks.
Sometimes people like never get asked a deep question, and I think if they do, it can both take them by surprise but also like be rewarding because it makes them think of what's important to them. Or
this has been great. This has been awesome. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for this.
I actually had a memory like after we spoke and you mentioned your podcast, and maybe it was the night when I was going back to study in my room and you guys were having a drink after the show, and you said like, you're going subterranean or something like this. And it came to me the next day when I was running your voice, and I was like, yeah, he gets it.
I mean, so like good on you for doing it. Seriously, like that's like to put yourself out there like that, to sort of get so uncomfortable, to like dig into a world of statistics and a lot of like different things. Like I have no doubt in my mind that that's going to just like, this experience is going to like serve you in so many different ways. So I truly am. I'm like really excited to see what you kind of hatch up as a result of it, because I think that there's you found a mountain of material probably to explore. But thank you so much for taking the time. I have one more question for you.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about, music and stuff like that, but what's music's role in your creative process? Like,
music is definitely a part of the equation. Like one way, my mum's actually a cello and piano teacher, and I played cello like all through high school and was in like the Queensland Youth Orchestra. So I love music and I love playing. And actually, like when I had my studio residency, I had my cello there and would like float around like from painting to having cello again. And that's one thing I've missed being in London is not having that. So, but in terms of actually like listening to music, it changes. Like it's definitely like a mood. Like I have these playlists called like Ultra, and came from my ultra running days, but like Ultra artists, or like Ultra London or Ultra Recovery. I used to use them very specifically. Like if I needed high energy, I had this one, or if I needed to cool down, like I was using it like as a tool. And now it's kind of just seamlessly gone into the background, where I can't listen to like podcasts if I need to concentrate. So if it's a create part of the phase, but once I'm painting, almost like not requiring that part of my brain, I will listen to like audiobooks. I always listen to like cello or piano music before I go to bed. Running playlists. I love disco music. I really love pop music. It took me a while to accept that I loved pop music. Like I used to be like, no, I'm like too cool for pop music. I'm like, no. Like I love pop music. I love the new Olivia Dean album, and I'm like, I love the sassiness of like Sabrina Carpenter's. Like Beautiful. I like to be in it.
That's great. I think that's like acceptance of pop music is something. I think that we're like finally like shedding our like the teenager, we're all like too cool for whatever, and then you just kind of go, oh no, there's a reason why this is played everywhere. This is actually very, very good.
Yes, yeah. I like it.
Do you have a song? Maybe we'll stick there. Is there a pop song that I should put on the podcast playlist?
It's from the new Olivia Dean album that I was like playing on repeat. Her new album is like, it's just a romantic. I just love it. I think maybe it was Man I Need. You can put that
Okay.
on there. Or
Okay.
Girl from Ipanema is also one of my faves. So corny, but like if I'm on holidays and walking down the street and it's sunny, bum 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 bum. Bum. Anyway,
Amazing. Amazing.
so corny.
There's a reason why that one stood the test of time, right? Like these are like these hooks, right? There's like
Yes.
earworms. There's a reason why they are where they are.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for this. This has been an absolute joy for me. So thank you for being on the show. And I guess one last thing is like, where can people find out about you, follow along for
Yes.
the ride?
Well, gemmaobrien.com is my website, or Mrs. Eves 101 is my Instagram. And where else am I? LinkedIn or Strava, but probably just gemmaobrien.com. You can go there and find all the spots.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking
Thanks,
the time to
Brad.
chat. Good luck with your last mile of
Thank you.
getting through over the finish line. So
And send my good energy to Melissa and to your mum.
yeah, will do. All right. Take care.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.